An American billionaire just spent $200 million building an underground bunker equipped with survival systems for 20 years. In China, a tech executive bought an entire island and is transforming it into a self-sufficient fortress. In Silicon Valley, the richest and most powerful people on the planet are buying properties in New Zealand as if they were basic necessities. Do they know something you don't know? Or perhaps they're simply succumbing to the same fear that haunts billions of people at this very moment. The feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with the direction humanity has taken. But here's what's truly terrifying. It's not what's coming that should terrify us. It's what's already happening. While you read these words, while you breathe, while your heart beats, you're participating in the largest psychological experiment in human history. An experiment where you are simultaneously the lab rat and the scientist, the observer and the observed, the test subject and the result. And nobody, not even those who designed this experiment, has the slightest idea how it will end. Do you want to know what the most frightening result of this experiment has been so far? It's not the rising rates of depression, anxiety, or suicide. It's not extreme political polarization or the deterioration of family bonds. The most terrifying result is that we have completely lost the ability to be alone with our own thoughts. When was the last time you spent 5 minutes in complete silence with no external stimulus, just you and your mind? Most people can no longer do this without panicking. We have become addicted to distraction, and this is not an accident. Imagine for a moment the life of a medieval peasant living in 12th century France. His name is Guillaume. He is 32 years old and has never traveled more than 20 kilometers from where he was born. He knows perhaps 200 people during his entire existence, and that would be considered an impressive number for the time. His village, called Saint-Pierre-du-Bois, has exactly 47 inhabitants, including children and elderly. Each face is not only familiar, but carries a story that Guillaume has known since childhood. He knows that Pierre, the blacksmith, lost 2 fingers in an accident when he was 15 years old. He knows the scar on Marie's face, the result of a fall when she was a girl. He remembers the birth of every child because the birth of a baby in a community of 47 people is an event that deeply marks the entire collective. When someone dies, Guillaume not only feels the emotional loss, but also the practical impact, because each person had specific and essential functions for the group's survival. When Guillaume walks through the narrow dirt streets of his small village, anonymity is impossible. Everyone knows not only who he is, but also where he came from, who his parents and grandparents were, what his role in the community is, what his fears and hopes are, his virtues and flaws, his abilities and limitations. His identity is not a subjective construction that he needs to discover through personal reflection or self-knowledge. It's an objective reality that is socially determined. He is the Guillaume who cultivates the field near the mill, whose father was the best pig farmer in the region, who has a special ability to predict storms by observing bird behavior, who once saved the life of a child who had fallen into the river. His reputation, his status, his function, his identity are intrinsically linked to this small but deeply connected group of human beings who depend on each other to survive. Existential loneliness, as we know it today, simply didn't exist as a mass phenomenon in that era, not because people were naturally happier, wiser, or more virtuous, but because the very social structure made impossible the type of anonymous isolation that characterizes our age. Guillaume could feel sad, anxious, confused, but he would never feel lost about his place in the world or about his importance to other people. He knew exactly why his existence mattered, because 20 people directly depended on the wheat he grew, because his absence would be immediately noticed and deeply felt by the entire community. When Guillaume died, there would not only be a ritualistic funeral, but a real and tangible hole in the social and economic structure of the village. Someone would have to take over his responsibilities, and the entire community would have to reorganize to compensate for his absence. His life had meaning not because he had discovered his passion or achieved his personal dreams, but because his existence was necessary and valued by a group of people he knew intimately. Today, an ordinary person living in a city like New York, London, or even smaller cities like Austin or Manchester can encounter more people in a single Monday morning than Guillaume knew during his entire 32 years of life. You wake up and take an Uber to work, briefly interacting with the driver, who is a complete stranger you'll probably never see again. During the 15-minute trip, you see hundreds of pedestrians, drivers, cyclists, all unique human beings with their own stories, dramas, joys, and worries. But to you, they are just parts of the urban landscape, as anonymous as trees or buildings. You arrive at the office and greet co-workers, people you spend 8 hours a day with, but know only superficial fragments about. You know that Anna works in the marketing department and has a dog, that Bruno is always complaining about traffic and drinks too much coffee, that Carla is taking a specialization course in finance and lives alone, but you don't really know who these people are in their depths, what their most intimate fears are, their most secret hopes, how they really feel when they're alone in their apartments at night. During lunch, you frequent a restaurant where you're served by waiters you see regularly, but with whom you've never had a meaningful conversation. You return home on a crowded subway, surrounded by 200 people in a small car, but you can perfectly make the entire journey without exchanging a word with anyone, without making prolonged eye contact with any of your temporary travel companions. At night, you open Instagram and see photos of 300 people, many of whom you know superficially from school, college, work, but about whom you only know what they've chosen to show in their carefully edited digital performances. You're exposed to thousands of faces daily. We're bombarded by millions of voices through social media. We have instant access to the opinions, emotions, and experiences of billions of people around the planet through news, documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos. Never in the history of humanity have we been so demographically dense, living in cities that concentrate more people than existed in entire continents 1,000 years ago. Never have we been so technologically connected, capable of exchanging instant messages with someone in Tokyo or Los Angeles, participating in video calls with people scattered across the globe. following in real time what millions of strangers are thinking and feeling through their social media posts. Never have we been so informationally saturated with access to more data, news, opinions, analysis, entertainment, and knowledge than any emperor or king in history could dream of. And yet, consistent research conducted by respected universities in various countries shows that levels of depression, anxiety, panic syndrome, feelings of isolation, and existential emptiness are the highest ever recorded since we began systematically measuring these phenomena. In countries like the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and even here in Brazil, the proportion of people who report feeling profoundly lonely has increased dramatically in the last 3 decades, exactly the period when communication technologies became more sophisticated and ubiquitous. This is not a curious paradox that can be solved with some technical adjustments. It's the hallmark of our era, the price we are paying for a specific type of progress that prioritized connectivity over connection, quantity over quality, efficiency over meaning. The explanation for this apparent contradiction doesn't lie in individual character flaws, in a supposed moral decay of contemporary humanity, or in conspiracy theories about deliberate social manipulation. It's rooted in fundamental structural transformations of how we organize our collective existence, changes so profound that they altered the very nature of human experience without us having adequate time to psychologically adapt to them. For most of human history, from when our species developed agriculture about 10,000 years ago until the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, we lived in small and relatively stable communities where each individual had a clear, necessary, and socially recognized role for the group's survival. You were the village blacksmith, and everyone knew that without your tools and skills, the community couldn't function properly. You were the midwife, and your experience helping women give birth was literally a matter of life or death for the community's continuity. You were the baker, the healer, the storyteller, the potter, the weaver. Your identity was not a subjective construction you needed to discover through self-discovery, therapy, self-help books, or spiritual journeys. It was an objective reality determined by your function in the community, by your specific skills, by your tangible contribution to collective well-being. You knew who you were because everyone around you knew who you were and depended on you to continue existing. There was little existential anxiety about your purpose in life because your purpose was evident and immediate. If you didn't do your job properly, specific people you knew personally would suffer direct consequences. If you did your job well, you would see the benefits in familiar faces, in grateful smiles, in a community that prospered thanks to your effort. Even during the first centuries of the industrial era, although communities grew significantly and social structures became more complex, there were still elements that preserved a certain sense of community identity and social meaning. Working-class neighborhoods, for example, were often organized around specific factories or particular industries. Workers not only worked together, but also lived close to each other, attended the same churches, their children studied in the same schools, their problems and achievements were shared. There were unions that created bonds of solidarity and collective identity. There were strong family traditions where professions were passed from father to son, creating generational continuity and a sense of belonging to something greater than the individual. Modern society, especially from the second half of the 20th century, completely and accelerated reversed this logic. Today, we are functionally anonymous and interchangeable in most of our daily social interactions. When you enter a shopping mall, you're not John or Mary with a unique story and a specific place in the community. You're a generic consumer, an economic unit, a set of demographic data, and purchasing preferences. When you call an Uber, you're not a specific person with whom the driver will develop a lasting relationship. You're a ride, a point A that needs to get to point B, a 5-star rating. When you make an online purchase, interact with a customer service chatbot, or enter an international chain restaurant, you're not recognized as a unique individual with specific needs and a distinct personality. You're a user, a customer, a data point in a complex algorithm that analyzes behavior patterns of millions of other people to predict what you might want to buy or consume. Your individuality, which we celebrate so much in theory through speeches about authenticity, self-expression, and personal fulfillment, dissolves in practice into a statistical mass of predictable and categorizable preferences and behaviors. You belong to the demographic group of women between 25 and 35 with higher education who live in major urban centers and are interested in fitness and sustainability. Or you're a man between 30 and 40, middle class, who likes technology and football and has small children. Your uniqueness reduces to a specific combination of general categories that can be easily replicated in thousands of other people. This creates a psychological situation absolutely unprecedented in human history. We are literally surrounded by people all the time. We live in extreme physical proximity to each other, but we don't have meaningful, lasting, or mutually dependent relationships with the vast majority of them. We are informationally connected to everyone through social media. We can instantly know what millions of people are thinking, feeling, doing, buying, but we don't really belong anywhere deeply and irreversibly. We can move cities, jobs, social circles with relative ease without leaving a significant hole in any specific social structure. This mobility and flexibility have obvious advantages. We are not trapped by destinies determined by where we were born, by our parents' profession, by the traditions of our original community. We can reinvent our lives, explore different possibilities, escape oppressive or limiting situations. But this freedom comes with a psychological cost we're only beginning to fully understand. When you can be anything, when there are no clear social structures telling you who you are and what your place in the world is, when your importance to other people is always conditional and temporary, you remain in a perpetual state of existential uncertainty about your value and meaning as a human being. This fundamental transformation of human experience accelerated exponentially with the advent of digital technologies in the last 2 decades. Social media promised to connect us more deeply, more comprehensively, and more democratically than was ever possible in human history. And in purely technical terms, they fulfilled exactly that promise. Today, you can exchange instant messages with someone in Tokyo, Nairobi, or Reykjavik, follow the daily lives of hundreds of people through their carefully selected Instagram posts, participate in online communities about virtually any imaginable interest, from vintage stamp collectors to medieval philosophy enthusiasts, from people who create art with recycled waste to support groups for those suffering from social anxiety. It has never been so easy to be technically in contact with so many people. It has never been so simple to find people who share your specific interests, however niche they may be. It has never been so quick to obtain information about any subject that sparks your curiosity. In a matter of seconds, you can watch videos of people living in countries you'll never visit, read detailed opinions about books written in languages you don't speak, see photos of exotic places on the other side of the planet, discover recipes from cultures completely different from your own. You can participate in political debates with people from different continents, learn new skills through free tutorials created by international experts, find advice for any problem you're facing given by people who have gone through similar experiences. But the type of connection that digital technology facilitates and promotes is fundamentally different in crucial and often imperceptible aspects from the type of human bond that nurtured communities for millennia. It's a carefully constructed surface connection based on selected images, edited with filters that hide imperfections, texts revised multiple times before being posted, calculated performances of idealized versions of ourselves, instead of intimacy built through shared physical presence in difficult moments, mutual vulnerability during real crises, reciprocal dependence for basic, practical, and emotional needs. When you post a photo on Instagram, you're sharing an edited version of your reality. You choose the most favorable angle, apply filters that improve lighting and hide flaws, select the happiest or most interesting moment of your day, write a caption that conveys the impression you want to make. You're not showing how you really feel when you wake up in the morning, how your house looks when it's messy, how you behave when you're stressed or sad, what your deepest worries or most embarrassing insecurities are. The people who interact with your content are reacting to a performance, not your genuine reality. And you do the same thing when you consume other people's content. You see highlighted, edited, and improved versions of others' lives and unconsciously compare these public performances with your private internal experience, which includes all the moments of boredom, frustration, fear, and confusion that other people carefully hide from their social media. This creates a systematic perceptual distortion where everyone seems to be having more fun, being more productive, having more satisfying relationships, living more interesting lives than you. The result is that we've developed the technical capacity to be in contact with billions of people, but we've lost the fundamental ability to form deep and lasting bonds. We've traded quality for quantity, intimacy for accessibility, presence for performance. And this trade leaves us in a perpetual state of emotional hunger. We're always seeking more connections, more likes, more online validation, because the interactions we have don't satisfy our basic psychological need for genuine belonging. It's like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. To understand the depth of this transformation, we need to recognize that it alters not only how we relate to each other, but how we relate to ourselves. For most of human history, individual identity was largely determined by the group. You knew who you were because you had a clear role in a specific community. In contemporary society, this has been reversed. Now you're expected to discover your identity autonomously, to become an authentic individual through an internal process of self-discovery. This sounds liberating in theory, and in many ways it really is. We have more freedom to choose our paths, to experiment with different versions of ourselves, to break with traditions that limited us. But this freedom comes with an enormous psychological cost. When you're responsible for constructing your own identity, when there's no clear social structure telling you who you are and what your place in the world is, you remain in a perpetual state of existential uncertainty. The famous identity crisis of contemporary youth is not a passing generational problem. It's the symptom of a society that demolished traditional structures of meaning without building functional alternatives. We ask each individual to become their own philosopher, psychologist, and spiritual guru, and then we're surprised when most people feel lost and anxious. This situation becomes even more complex when we consider how the modern economy amplifies these existential problems. Consumer society constantly promises that happiness and meaning can be bought. If you're feeling empty, buy a new smartphone. If you're anxious about your future, invest in an online course. If you're lonely, subscribe to a dating platform. The market has transformed our existential anxieties into business opportunities, offering products and services for each type of emptiness we feel. But this commercial logic only perpetuates the problem it pretends to solve. It teaches us to seek external solutions for internal problems, to confuse consumption with fulfillment, entertainment with meaning. The irony is that this material and informational abundance, which should liberate us, has become an additional source of anxiety. When you have access to thousands of career options, hundreds of different life philosophies, infinite possibilities for how to live, freedom of choice becomes a burden. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. The more options we have, the harder it becomes to choose any of them with confidence. And more importantly, the harder it becomes to be satisfied with the choices we make. Because there's always the possibility that a different option would have been better. Our ancestors had far fewer choices, but also far less anxiety about whether they were living correctly. Not because they were wiser or more virtuous, but because the available options were limited and socially clear. If you were born the son of a farmer in 15th century Tuscany, you would probably become a farmer, marry someone from the region, raise your children in the same valley where your grandparents were born, die and be buried in the local church cemetery. If you were born into a family of artisans in Bruges, you would learn the family trade, inherit your father's tools and clientele, pass your technique to your own children. These limitations were restrictive in many aspects, closing doors and possibilities we would today consider essential, but they also offered something we have almost completely lost: absolute clarity about your role in the world and emotional security about the direction of your life. Today, a 20-year-old needs to choose among dozens of university courses, hundreds of possible careers, thousands of cities where they could live, millions of people. They could date through dating apps, countless life philosophies and belief systems that promise happiness and fulfillment. This abundance of options should be liberating. And in many ways it really is. But it also generates a specific type of psychological suffering that our ancestors never experienced. Paralysis before infinity, anxiety about having to build a coherent identity from millions of possible fragments, terror of wasting your life making the wrong choices. Imagine trying to explain to Guillaume, our medieval peasant, the phenomenon of social media and the online performance culture that characterizes our era. How would you describe the experience of spending hours a day observing edited and improved versions of the lives of people you've never met personally, feeling envy of achievements that may or may not be real, comparing your complicated internal reality full of imperfections with the carefully filtered public performances of others? How would you explain the addiction of seeking validation through likes and comments from strangers, or the anxiety of not receiving enough attention online, or the feeling of inadequacy that arises when your posts don't get the same amount of interactions as other people's? How would you describe the strange compulsion to constantly document and share moments of your life instead of simply living them, the need to transform personal experiences into content for public consumption, the pressure to maintain a consistent and attractive online persona that may or may not have any relationship to who you really are when nobody is watching? To Guillaume, this would seem like a form of voluntary insanity, a bizarre type of self-torture where you deliberately expose yourself to constant judgment and comparison with hundreds of other people. And perhaps he would be completely correct in that assessment. But we didn't consciously choose to create this system. It emerged gradually through millions of small individual decisions and technological innovations that seemed beneficial in isolation, but collectively created a social environment that doesn't correspond to our basic psychological needs. Each new platform promised to connect us better. Each new feature promised to make our communication more efficient. Each new algorithm promised to show us exactly what we wanted to see. And technically, these promises were fulfilled, but the final result was a world where we are more informationally connected and more emotionally lonely than ever. I'm not advocating a romantic return to the past, abandoning all the achievements of modernity. The transformations that brought us here also brought undeniable and revolutionary benefits. We live longer and with better quality of life. We have access to more knowledge and information than any previous generation could dream of. More educational and professional opportunities, more individual freedom to choose our life paths than any civilization in history. Women can choose their careers and determine their own destiny. People from different ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds can relate and form communities. Ideas can circulate globally in seconds. Scientific discoveries can benefit all humanity almost instantly. These achievements are real, valuable, and should not be abandoned lightly. But we need to honestly recognize that we also lost some fundamental things in the process, and that these are not inevitable costs of progress, but specific consequences of choices we made about how to organize our society. We need to understand that the existential problems we face are not temporary bugs that can be fixed with more technology, more therapy, more consumption, or more personal optimization. They are inherent characteristics of the type of society we built, and changing them requires rethinking some fundamental premises about what constitutes a well-lived life and a healthy community. Some of the answers may lie in movements that are already emerging spontaneously around the world, created by people who intuit that something essential is missing from their lives, but can't name exactly what it is. Intentional communities that deliberately choose to limit technology use and prioritize face-to-face interactions, even if it means giving up certain conveniences. Slow living movements that consciously resist the constant acceleration of modern life, celebrating slowness as a form of cultural resistance. Ancient practices like meditation, community rituals, manual crafts, local agriculture that are being rediscovered by people who miss something they can't clearly identify, but recognize when they experience it. These are not passing fads or romantic nostalgia, but symptoms of a deep human need that our society is not adequately satisfying. They are intuitive attempts to recover aspects of human experience that were inadvertently sacrificed in the name of efficiency, connectivity, and technological progress. The central question is not how to romantically return to the past, but how to consciously integrate the genuine advantages of modernity with some updated and sophisticated version of ancestral wisdom about how to form meaningful communities and stable identities. How can we maintain individual freedom without falling into existential isolation? How can we take advantage of technological tools without being psychologically consumed by them? How can we live in a world of 8 billion people without losing our individual humanity and our capacity to form deep bonds? How can we recover some sense of purpose and meaning in a society that mainly values quantitative metrics of success? These questions don't have simple or universal answers, but some promising directions are emerging. One involves relearning the deliberate and conscious art of being present, which our culture saturated with constant stimuli has made surprisingly difficult. How many times can you stay completely alone with your own thoughts for half an hour without resorting to smartphones, music, podcasts, television, or any form of external entertainment? For many people, this experience has become almost intolerable, not because they are naturally restless, but because we've lost the cultural practice of cultivating our inner life. Another direction involves rediscovering the value of voluntary limitations. In a culture that equates freedom with maximizing options, deliberately choosing to restrict some possibilities may seem contradictory. But paradoxically, certain limitations can be profoundly liberating. When you consciously choose to limit your entertainment options, your social circles, your professional goals, you free yourself from the tyranny of constant choice and can focus on deepening and improving what you chose to keep. It's like the difference between having access to 1,000 television channels that you constantly zap through without ever watching anything completely, and consciously choosing to watch a few high-quality programs with full attention. A third direction involves intentionally revaluing slowness and depth in a world obsessed with speed and surface. This can mean choosing to read physical books instead of only consuming online articles, having long and unhurried conversations instead of exchanging quick messages, cooking meals at home instead of ordering food through apps, walking without destination instead of always optimizing your routes. Not because these activities are inherently better, but because they cultivate specific types of attention and presence that our culture is systematically eroding. A fourth direction involves cultivating relationships that transcend mutual entertainment and are based on genuine reciprocal dependence. This can be as simple as creating neighbor groups that regularly help each other with practical tasks instead of just socializing occasionally, or forming study or artistic creation groups where people commit to growing together over time instead of just consuming content together, or participating in community projects where your specific contribution really matters to the collective result. But perhaps the most fundamental transformation needed is philosophical and spiritual. Rethinking what constitutes a well-lived life in terms that go beyond traditional indicators of material success. Our culture measures progress mainly through quantitative metrics that are easily comparable: salary, number of social media followers, square meters of the house, number of trips taken, amount of experiences accumulated, quantity of knowledge acquired. But many of the things that most nourish deep human well-being are qualitative and difficult to measure. Depth of relationships, sense of purpose and meaning, connection with something greater than ourselves, moments of beauty and transcendence, emotional and spiritual wisdom, ability to find peace and contentment in simple circumstances. If we continue optimizing our society only for metrics that are easy to quantify, we will continue creating lives that are impressive on paper but empty in lived experience. True human wealth cannot be measured by the standards our culture obsessively applies. It resides in dimensions of experience that our ancestors understood intuitively, but that we need to consciously rediscover. Humanity is going through civilizational adolescence. We discovered unprecedented technological and scientific powers, created economic and social systems of unprecedented complexity, but we haven't yet developed the emotional and spiritual wisdom to use these powers in ways that truly benefit us in the long term. We are like teenagers who receive the car keys and their parents' credit card, technically capable of doing almost anything, but without the maturity to discern what's worth doing, without the experience to predict the consequences of our actions, without the deep values necessary to guide our choices. Like all adolescents, this period is simultaneously exciting and terrifying, full of possibilities and risks, promises and dangers. And like all successful adolescents, its resolution will not come through rejecting the powers we've acquired, but through developing the wisdom to use them responsibly. This requires not only technical innovation, but philosophical and spiritual maturation, not only more knowledge about how the world works, but more wisdom about how we want to live in it. I need to ask, as we explore these ideas together, at what moments in your life do you feel most intensely this disconnection we're discussing? Those moments when you're surrounded by people but feel completely alone? I know many of us carry these sensations in silence, perhaps for fear of seeming antisocial or ungrateful for all the opportunities we have. But your feelings are valid and shared by millions of people facing the same paradoxes. If this feeling resonates with you, share in the comments, I feel this disconnection when. Your honesty may be exactly what another person needs to read today to understand they're not alone in this search for genuine meaning amid the chaos of modernity. The future of humanity depends on our ability to find a balance between the benefits of modernity and the basic needs of human nature. This won't happen through great revolutions or revolutionary technological innovations. It will happen through millions of small conscious choices made by individuals who decide to prioritize quality over quantity, depth over surface, presence over performance. Perhaps the true revolution of the 21st century won't be technological, but psychological and spiritual. Perhaps it consists of learning again the lost art of being truly present, of forming genuine bonds, of finding meaning in simple and lasting things, instead of constantly seeking the next novelty or achievement. Perhaps it involves recognizing that in a world full of noise, silence becomes revolutionary. In a world obsessed with speed, slowness becomes an act of resistance. In a world that only values what can be measured and monetized, contemplation and gratitude become forms of rebellion. The question is not whether we will completely solve this paradox of living in a simultaneously full and empty world. The question is whether we can develop it consciously, deliberately choosing what type of human density we want to create. We can continue building a society where we are physically close but emotionally distant, where we have access to everything but connection to very little. Or we can begin to imagine and build forms of social organization that honor both our need for individual freedom and our ancestral need for genuine belonging. The choice is in our hands, but the time to make it consciously is running out. Every day that passes without deliberate reflection on these paradoxes, we adapt a little more to them until what was strange and disturbing becomes normal and accepted. The normalization of loneliness amid the crowd, of anxiety amid abundance, of emptiness amid excess stimulation represents perhaps the greatest threat to the mental and spiritual health of our species. But recognizing these patterns is the first step to transcending them. Understanding that our existential discomfort is not a personal failure, but a natural response to unnatural social conditions can be profoundly liberating. This allows us to stop blaming ourselves for not being able to perfectly adapt to a system that was designed to leave us perpetually dissatisfied and begin imagining healthier alternatives. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the existential challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this continuing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. And if this content resonated with your own reflections, a click on the like button helps other people find these important discussions. We are not alone in this search for meaning and clarity in times of accelerated transformation.
A lot of people hear AI, artificial intelligence, they think that intelligence is somehow connected to truth. So a super intelligent AI will have a kind of super access to truth. No, intelligence is not about truth. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to define goals and solve problems on the way to the goal. The truth is one of the things that can help you do that, but not the only one. And we have seen with human beings that human beings until today have been the most intelligent animals, entities on the planet, and at the same time we have also been the most delusional entities on the planet. We believe nonsensical things that no chimpanzee and no dog and no horse would ever believe. And a super intelligence is very likely to be super delusional, even more deluded than we are. So we would need a very strong ethical basis, a very strong basis of values, more than even before, because the challenges are bigger.
The democratic conversation is breaking down. And every country has its own explanation. Like you talk to Americans, what's happening there between Democrats and Republicans? Why can't they agree on even the most basic facts? And they give you all these explanations about the unique conditions of American history and society. But you see the same thing in Brazil. You see the same thing in France, in the Philippines. So it can't be the unique conditions of this or that country. It's the underlying technological revolution.
I would assume that us having more information and more access to information would lead to more truth, less conspiracy, more agreement, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, not at all. Most information in the world is junk. It's like with food. There was a time, like a century ago in many countries, where food was scarce. So people ate whatever they could get, especially it was full of fat and sugar, and they thought that more food is always good. Like if you ask your great-grandmother, she would tell you, yes, more food is always good. And then we reach a time of abundance. And we have all this industrialized processed food, which is artificially full of fat and sugar and salt and whatever. And it's obviously bad for us. The idea that more food is always good, no. And definitely not all this junk food. And the same thing has happened with information.